You know that moment in weddings. The one where the officiant asks, "If anyone objects, speak now or forever hold your peace." Well, my mother took that moment a little too seriously. She stood up, dramatic as ever, fake tears and all, and tried to wreck my entire wedding before it even began. But what she didn't know was that my fiancé had been preparing for that moment, and what he pulled out in response. Absolute mic drop. Let me take you back to where it all started. I met Daniel in a place where you don't expect love stories to begin. The metro. It was late, close to midnight. The train car was nearly empty, just a few exhausted people heading home. I had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at the hospital. I'm a nurse, and my legs felt like jelly. I dropped into one of the seats and noticed this guy sitting across from me. He was completely lost in a battered copy of The Great Gatsby, brow furrowed, lips barely moving with the words. There was something oddly magnetic about him. The way he sat in his worn navy hoodie and scuffed-up sneakers, totally at peace in his own little bubble. It wasn't just how he looked. It was the energy. Calm. Centered. I caught myself staring a few times. Okay, maybe more than a few. And when he finally looked up and caught me, I felt my face heat up instantly. I turned away so fast I probably gave myself whiplash. He smiled. Not smug, just knowing. And then he said, "Fitzgerald has that effect on people. Makes you forget where you are." I blinked. I wouldn't know, I admitted. Never read it. His eyes widened like I'd just said I'd never seen the sky. Never. That's a tragedy. You're missing out on one of the greatest American novels ever written. I shrugged. I barely have time to sleep these days, let alone read. We talked a bit more. Not numbers, not full names, just people. Eventually, he stood up as the train approached his stop. "Maybe our paths will cross again," he said. "If they do, I'll lend you my copy." I smiled. I'd like that. He paused at the door, turned around, and said, "Sometimes the best stories find us when we least expect them." Then the doors closed behind him. I didn't expect to see him again. I thought it was one of those fleeting, almost moments you tuck away in your memory. But life, or fate, had other plans. About a week later, I was on the metro again. This time during rush hour, packed wall to wall. I stood holding the overhead bar, half zoned out from exhaustion. Suddenly, I felt a sharp yank on my shoulder. Someone was pulling at my purse. Before I could react, the man had ripped it off me and was shoving his way through the crowd. "Hey, stop him!" I shouted, but people just stared or looked away. No one moved. No one except Daniel. Out of nowhere, there he was, pushing past people like a man on a mission. The thief reached the next stop and bolted out. Daniel followed, tackling him right onto the platform. I fought my way through the crowd and just barely made it off the train before the doors shut. By the time I reached them, the guy was gone, but Daniel was sitting on the ground, hair tousled, a scrape above his eyebrow, and my purse in his hands. "Your book recommendation service is a little dramatic," I said, breathless, helping him up. He laughed, blood trickling lightly from the cut. "I still owe you a copy of Gatsby." We ended up grabbing coffee while I helped clean the cut. One coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a walk home. And that walk home ended in a kiss that made my knees actually buckle. 6 months later, we were crazy in love. And Daniel, well, he was everything. Kind, gentle, grounded. The kind of person who would remember your dog's name and your favorite tea. But there was just one problem. My mother. Margot. Margot is a force. She wasn't just unimpressed with Daniel. She was insulted by his existence. "A librarian, Sophie?" she asked the first time I mentioned him. "That's your idea of a suitable partner?" "Yes, Mom." a librarian. He's thoughtful, passionate, and funny." She pursed her lips, like she'd just tasted something bitter. "And what kind of future can he offer? Unless books suddenly start paying dividends, I don't see the appeal." I knew that argument wasn't going anywhere. Margot had always been obsessed with appearances. She liked to play upper-class royalty, name-dropping, bragging about vacations that were spontaneous, but took months to save for, talking about people with yachts we never actually met. But I loved Daniel. And that sapphire ring he proposed with? Simple, elegant, deep blue. "It reminded me of your eyes," he'd said when he slipped it on my finger. Of course, my mother hated it. "That's it?" She scoffed when I showed her. "It's not even a carrot." "Mom, I love it," I told her. "It's perfect." She sighed dramatically. "Well, I suppose it can be upgraded later." The first dinner with Daniel and my family was a full-blown disaster, no sugarcoating it. My mom, Margot, showed up in a designer dress and draped herself in every expensive-looking piece of jewelry she owned, practically glittering like a chandelier. She wouldn't stop mentioning her dear friend from Monaco who owned a yacht. You know, the one she's never actually met. Daniel, for his part, was a complete gentleman. He complimented the house, asked thoughtful questions about my mom's charity work, and even brought along an expensive bottle of wine, one that my dad, Richard, genuinely appreciated. "Where'd you get this?" my dad asked, squinting at the label. "A small vineyard in Napa," Daniel replied casually. "The owner's an old family friend." My mother snorted, actually snorted. "Family friends with vineyard owners? How convenient." "Mom, please," I warned under my breath, shooting her a look. But Daniel? Cool as ever. He just smiled and refilled her glass. Later that evening, my dad pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I like him, Sophie," he said, nodding slightly. "He's got substance." "Thanks, Dad." "Your mother'll come around," he added, though the flicker of doubt in his eyes didn't quite match the words. "She doesn't have to," I said firmly. I glanced toward the dining room, where Daniel was helping to clear dishes, despite my mother's polite protests. "I'm marrying him, either way." And I meant it. But Margot, she made the next few months leading up to the wedding absolute hell. Every planning session turned into a passive-aggressive minefield. When Daniel's parents didn't attend one of the engagement dinners, she was quick to pounce. "Not even a video call? Strange how they're always unavailable." "They're very private people," I replied through clenched teeth. "They travel a lot for work," she laughed. "Or maybe they're embarrassed." She mocked his job. "A librarian? Really? Books are dying. What is he going to do when people stop reading?" She even critiqued his wardrobe. "He doesn't own a single suit that isn't from a department store, does he?" "Mom," I snapped one night, "you're looking for reasons to dislike him." She crossed her arms and said nothing, which somehow felt worse. The night before the wedding, she came into my childhood bedroom, uninvited, of course, and sat at the edge of my bed like she had something dramatic to announce. "It's not too late to call this off," she said softly. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "People would understand," she continued, as if this was a casual suggestion. "Better a canceled wedding than a failed marriage." I stared at her. "Mom, I love him." She didn't flinch. Love doesn't last. Stability does. Security. Money. I took a deep breath. "He makes me feel secure? With what?" She scoffed. "Library cards?" I stood up. Absolutely done. "You raised me to be happy. Or at least Dad did." Her expression darkened. "I swear I'll behave tomorrow, but don't say I didn't warn you." "Just promise me you won't make a scene," I pleaded. She placed a hand over her chest, mock solemn. "I promise to act in your best interest." That should have been my red flag. that tiny, slippery loophole she left herself. "I'm holding you to that, Mom." And I really believed that was the end of it. Fast forward to the wedding day. It was beautiful. Everything Daniel and I had envisioned. We held it in an old historic library, his dream venue. The high vaulted ceilings, the stained glass windows, rows of ancient books lining the walls. It felt like stepping into a storybook. The aisle was sprinkled with rose petals. A string quartet played softly. My dad walked me down the aisle, and Daniel was waiting at the altar, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're so beautiful," he whispered as my father placed my hand in his. Everything felt like magic, like the world had paused just for us. Then, the moment. "If anyone objects to this union, speak now, or forever hold your peace." A few seconds of silence. Then, the sound of fabric rustling, a chair scraping. My stomach dropped. I turned, and there she was. Margot, standing. My mother, in all her theatrical glory, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief and looking like someone had just shot her dog. The crowd gasped. The air itself seemed to freeze. "I just need to speak my truth before it's too late," she said, voice trembling, but not from emotion, from performance. "Mom," I hissed, "what are you doing?" She ignored me. Of course she did. Her eyes swept the room as if she were the star of some tragic opera. "I love my daughter," she began, "and I only want what's best for her. But this man," she gestured toward Daniel like he was something stuck to her shoe, "is simply not good enough. She could have had a doctor, a lawyer, a real man with ambition and success. Instead, she's throwing away her future on this." Every word was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Dad's face turned ghostly pale. The officiant looked like he wanted to dig a hole and crawl into it. Whispers rippled through the crowd. But Daniel? He squeezed my hands gently and smiled. He smiled, then he turned, calm, cool, composed, and looked my mother in the eye. "You're right," he said softly. "She does deserve the best." My mom straightened, victorious. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what was coming next. So there we were, me frozen at the altar, my mother standing smugly in front of everyone thinking she'd just derailed the wedding of the century. And Daniel? Calm as ever. He turned to her, nodded, and said, "You're right. She deserves the best." My mother lit up like she'd just won an Oscar, but then he reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded document. He walked over and handed it to her, still smiling politely. "What's this?" she asked, suspicious. "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to it. "Take a look." Margot unfolded the page slowly, and as her eyes scanned the contents, the color drained from her face. Silence, just the faint rustle of the paper in her hands. "Do you recognize that?" Daniel asked, his voice still perfectly even. "It's the credit report you failed." The crowd gasped. My breath caught. Dad blinked like he hadn't heard it right. "I ran a check," Daniel continued, "because I was curious. I wanted to see if the woman who constantly brags about wealth, about yachts and high society, actually lived the life she pretended to." He gave a small shrug. "Turns out you're drowning in credit card debt. You've got a second mortgage on the house that no one knew about. And my favorite part, you were denied a personal loan just last month." My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. "You violated my privacy," she finally choked out. Daniel chuckled, soft but sharp. Funny how people who love privacy also love public performances. The silence in the room was electric. People were leaning forward in their chairs. Nobody knew where this was going. Then Daniel turned back to the crowd. to everyone who had just heard my mother try to ruin the biggest day of our lives. "I get it," he said. "I've never fit her version of what a worthy partner looks like. Not enough flash, not enough status, just a quiet guy in sneakers and books." He looked at me then, and the softness returned to his voice. "But I didn't want someone who cared about how much money I made. I wanted someone who loved me without knowing a thing about my bank account." Then he turned back to Margot and dropped the final bombshell. "I'm a billionaire." You could have heard a pin drop. My dad actually choked on air. A woman in the front row let out an audible, "What?" "Margot?" She stumbled backward like she'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" I whispered, blinking at Daniel. He nodded, completely calm. "My family's old money. Real estate, publishing, international holdings. The works. But I never flaunt it. I live simply. I work simply. Because I wanted to be loved for me. Not for a name or a number." He turned to me, gently taking my hands. "I was going to tell you after the honeymoon. The library where I work? I own it. And a few others across the country. I just didn't want that to be what defined me. Or us." I couldn't speak. My brain was doing cartwheels trying to process it all. "You're serious?" I finally managed. Daniel looked at me with the most earnest expression I've ever seen. "Every word." I stared at him for a long second. "I'm not mad you're rich," I said finally, blinking through the emotional chaos. "I'm just mad you let me pick up the check at Olive Garden that one time." He laughed. The crowd laughed. And just like that, the tension began to ease. "Are you angry I didn't tell you sooner?" he asked softly, still reading my face. "A little," I admitted. "But I get why. And honestly, I don't care." "Do you still want to marry me?" he asked, voice low but full of hope. I didn't even hesitate. More than ever. And I grabbed his face and kissed him right there at the altar. The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause, laughter. Like the air had been cracked open. "Margot?" She turned and practically ran down the aisle, heels clicking furiously against the floor. I didn't look back. My dad, bless him, stayed. He came up after the ceremony, eyes glassy with tears. "I had no idea," he said to Daniel. "None at all." "Would it have mattered?" Daniel asked. Dad smiled, clapped him on the shoulder. "Not one bit, son. Not one bit." The ceremony wrapped with more joy than I thought was even possible. And the reception? An absolute dream. The food, the dancing, the way Daniel's eyes never left mine for more than a second. It felt like the whole world had shifted into place. And then, a surprise. Daniel's parents. They hadn't been around during the engagement. My mother used that fact to fuel half her insults. But that night, just before our first dance, they walked up to me and enveloped me in the warmest, most genuine hug. Turns out, they'd been overseas, volunteering and overseeing projects for their charitable foundation. They'd flown in secretly to surprise us. His mother whispered in my ear, "We wanted to meet the woman who loved our son for his heart, not his net worth." And in that moment, I knew I'd truly married into a family, not just a fortune. The night of the wedding felt like something out of a fairy tale. And not just because of the chandeliers or the champagne. It was because of how real everything felt. No more masks, no more lies. Just the two of us, surrounded by people who finally saw the truth. As the reception moved into full swing, Daniel and I shared our first dance beneath a canopy of string lights. The music was soft, and the air was warm, filled with laughter, quiet clinks of glasses, and the occasional sniffle from an emotional guest. But all I could focus on was him. This man, who had saved my purse and my heart in one lifetime, who had chosen honesty, humility, and love over pretense. And just as the last note of the song faded, My phone buzzed quietly in my clutch. It was a text from my dad. Your mother won't be speaking to you for a while, but between us? I've never been more proud. Daniel is exactly the kind of man I always hoped you'd find. Someone who values you above everything else. Money or no money. I showed it to Daniel. He read it, smiled, and nodded thoughtfully. Your dad's a wise man, he said, his arm tightening gently around my waist. Unlike my mother, I sighed. He chuckled softly and led me to the edge of the dance floor, where we stood under the stars, quiet for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me forever. You know, in all the great novels, the real villains, they're never evil because they're poor or rich. They're villains because they value the wrong things. I turned to him, amused. Is that a line from Gatsby? Nope, he said with a grin. That one's mine. That was the thing about Daniel. Even when he wasn't quoting someone else's brilliance, he had plenty of his own to offer. As we swayed under the night sky, surrounded by friends, family, books, laughter, and truth, I realized something so simple and so powerful. Wealth isn't about numbers in a bank account. It's about having the courage to live authentically, to love without conditions, to choose character over status, and heart over heritage. It's about standing at the altar while someone tries to drag you down, and holding your head high, hand in hand with the one person who lifts you higher. And in that moment, with the man I loved holding me close, with my father's quiet words echoing in my heart, and my mother's drama fading into irrelevance, I felt rich in every way that mattered. Not because of Daniel's billions, not because of sapphire rings or surprise reveals, but because I had chosen someone who saw me, chose me, fought for me, and that made me the luckiest and richest woman in the world. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What would you do if your parent tried to sabotage your wedding? Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and keep writing your own story.